Well, welcome, Julian. I'm so happy to have you here today on the ERP Truth Tellers podcast. You have a lot of experience with ERP, data, manufacturers. I understand you come from a healthcare data analytics kind of background.
Yeah.
I love the fact that you've dabbled in AI, learning a lot about AI, like officially learning about it, not just I asked ChatGPT, what is AI? Like in-depth learning on that, and quantum computing. You're a man of diverse interest, I have observed, in the relationship we have been building. And I'm happy to have you here today, particularly to dive into a topic that I think is on the minds of a lot of manufacturers these days and a lot of business owners at all different levels. We have been coming across many companies that say, hey, we want to buy another company. We want to buy another manufacturer, and it could be a manufacturer in a vertical that aligns with what they're making, or it could be another manufacturer that is similar. It might be a manufacturer that supplies something for them. But this is happening, these consolidations and buying of companies and grouping them together is happening under a lot of different names today. And whether it is private equity or whether it's business owners who just say, hey, I want to purchase another business. Anytime a business buys another business in this manufacturing realm, they're going to need to face a problem pretty quickly. One of the first questions that they're going to face is, how are we going to integrate these companies so that they work together efficiently? They face the problem of, what are we going to do about how can we consolidate things within the company and really find efficiencies that didn't exist before these two entities came together? These two entities had their own personalities, they had their own people, they had their own processes, and of course, they had their own ERP systems, which were totally different. Now, what are we going to do about this problem? And I have observed that this becomes quite a topic of discussion because there are multiple approaches that a company can take when they buy another company to handle how that data is going to get put together in a way that's useful for the organization. And there are a lot of questions around how to do that. And so I know you have experience in this area, and I'm really interested in our conversation today, diving into what are some of the things that an organization needs to be aware of to help them make good decisions to handle their ERP systems and this migration of people and processes and systems so that they can align them as quickly as possible and get the benefit out of the purchase of the other company as quickly as possible. So this is kind of where I'd like to kind of guide our conversation to start off with today. So I know I've thrown a lot at you just now, but I would love to just kind of kick it off with you right now. And if you could tell me, first of all, tell me a little bit more about your background as it relates to this and your experience, and then let's dive into some of those topics.
Sure. Well, I first want to step back and address what it's like to be in that situation. You have a vendor pushing an ERP. You have a business coach trying to offer you some better headspace. You have other people coaching you on how to get something ready to sell or to help you figure out how to buy it. You have people scoping, evaluating financials, people lying to you at different points on both sides so you don't know what the truth is. So that's where you actually that's what the environment actually looks like when you're trying to do this. Whether you're on the side of an owner who's been at this for 30 years, ready to retire, do you do an ERP change now because it might add valuation, or do you kick that down the road to the next person? So these questions are strategic, and a lot of them are significant in terms of costs and possible impact. The questions about AI, I don't mean generative AI, I mean like machine learning and predictive, is often not relevant to most mid-level manufacturers because they're just trying to figure out how to get things out the door better. So the key areas around learning that might impact maintenance or predicting demand, those aren't even on the table at this point. And quantum computing, which does promise optimization and supply chain improvements, where you could potentially do a calculation that takes decades or millennium to do in a few seconds
Doesn't even
doesn't
apply.
even matter because you're just trying to get something scheduled to
Yeah.
get a little bit better. So we'll just take that mostly out of the equation. But if it comes
Okay.
back around, we can certainly talk about it. But once again, you have people pushing for those things, and they're really not relevant to most. So getting through the noise of all these people in your headspace is fundamentally a leadership question as well. Where I look at it is from the data, since I was basically coming out of my first role was ended up working in databases, and then how to query them and get information out to help the decision makers make those decisions. So that evolved into a number of other things like data modeling in healthcare, financial, and manufacturing. Data integration, which goes by a bunch of different names. Technical people will call it ETL, like the technical term for something, or
I have no
now
idea
they
what
call it data.
ETL
Well,
is.
now they doesn't matter. They call it data pipelines now. So now it's called data
Okay.
pipelines. So we've gone through all these transitions, and there's quite a bit of rebranding of technical terms that just a way of some ways for salespeople to make more money. There is some truth to it, but a lot of it's just a lot of stuff that needs to be sorted out. So regarding the data aspect and the analytics aspect, that's something I bring in terms of how to apply some of the best practices from healthcare and other mature industries for manufacturers who tend to not deal with that because they're so focused on making things. Their business isn't technology based by its nature. So this conversation could focus quite a bit on how that
Yeah.
how those can be
The best
applied.
practices, yeah, how can we kind of shorten that gap and help a business owner or a group owner make a good decision on what are they going to do with the fact that they've got two different ERPs now that they're trying to bring together, two different companies. There's this, I mean, it's a huge
Well,
undertaking.
before we get to two, let's see if we can get one working.
Okay. Oh, that's a great start. I
You
like
know?
that.
So
So,
is a business, whether one that you own and run or one that you're acquiring, does it run well? Does it have an ERP system that functions well? Is it on a up to date system like the current version, or is it on a real dated? Half the time it seems it's on some legacy system that's been sunset many years ago, and they've been limping along and continuing to punt that down. So there's now a factor in valuation that can have,
it can
because
impact.
not just the cost to change it and the risk before it gets migrated, it's going to impact the business for a year while you make that transition. It could be on a kind of a people been on Dynamics is okay, it works. QuickBooks, people run things on QuickBooks or custom ERPs, and at some point in the modern field, unless you are a very big player that requires extensive customizations, it's better to be on a package that is easy to integrate with other tools and all those types of things.
So you start with basically an audit of an ERP, it's the ERP system of the company you're acquiring and also the one that you're on. You've got to find out whether it's working or not for them, basically.
Yeah, and there's typically problems that the system has, and there'll be like things related to the scheduling system. The APS or MRP system doesn't schedule correctly, or
I'm curious,
cost.
actually.
There's always a financial component. Things aren't costed properly, and the things they think are $5 are coming out at $6, and the financial people are telling you there's a problem here, and so they're raising their flag saying this system is not giving us accurate costs, which impact the bottom line.
You know, you mentioned APS. In my experience, it seems like that often is not even handled in the ERP system. Like people they get overwhelmed by APS and it just isn't implemented correctly or doesn't work.
I think it's taken as guidance.
Okay.
So it's like I have this amazing scheduler
Yeah.
that accounts for everything in a perfect world. And then there's some reason that they don't trust it, or that it just doesn't quite do what it needs. So what they do is they take sometimes row by row and move it into some Excel thing that they trust, or they export lines and put them somewhere else, and then they go manage it, and then they go back over and approve a job or something like that. And that's
Yeah.
just universally true. And it happens both in scheduling work orders or scheduling purchase orders for shipment. You just can't trust the system to know what's going on, even when you've gotten the top tier systems.
is that a system issue,
It's
implementation issue, a process issue? What is that issue typically?
well, I have different opinions about that, but you'd think that when you have a top tier system with the top tiered value added resellers with the best people who know
Yeah.
how to use those systems, that they can make it work. And then you have one in, and they tell you that field should be checked, or that method, and then these other fields need to be set. And then you try it, and it might work better, but you find out it's not. So then the next one that comes in, maybe from the same company or a different one, just as highly skilled expert, like in terms of their pedigree and how long they've been at it, gives a different set of reasons for why it's not working. Then you try that, and that doesn't work either for some reason. And then the person there, if they're really smart, may have a sense of it, but they still can't get it working because they don't know enough about the underlying tech. So they're reliant on these other often external vendors. Now, if you're large enough, you might have your own technical team, but I'd find that you're well over 100 million, into much higher than that before you'd ever have that type of resource in house. So you're really relying on others to help you, which is a tough place to be,
It
because
almost
you're kind of
feels
like your hands are tied.
yeah, it almost feels like a little bit of the luck of the draw if you get a really
Yeah.
good consultant to help you set that up with APS. But it's not it's not the system you think so much as
Not clear.
the
It's nuances to the business. So if you need to schedule out a certain, I mean, I'm thinking of one recently where if you schedule out, it depends on how long the runs are, and do you have a lot of like very specific manufacturing right now.
I gotcha.
Are you doing a lot of custom jobs, or real small custom jobs, which has a nuance to it, or do you do really large runs that require maybe 3 days or a couple days? So the in one case, the changeover on a real small job has a huge impact, because you're going to run that job for maybe 3 hours, and if it's an hour to change over, you don't get much throughput. If it's a job that runs for 3 days, setting up for 2 hours is nothing, because it's going to run for 3 days. So the changeover is less significant. So the having that domain knowledge of the best way to organize things, the APS may not understand. Or if you're trying to bundle jobs because you're going to run for 3 or 4 days and then do a different type, you won't come back to that other one for quite some time. So you have to have your system look out far enough for what that's going to be until it comes back around again, so you can fill all that demand. So having an APS understand that those types of business rules, that the people in the team that run the business understand. Like they understand that, so that's why they take it to Excel and do their manipulation, and then go back and put in what they need.
So sometimes it's just more difficult to get it out of the systems.
It's
the
easier
APS.
just to take it out of the
It's
system.
easier to take it out of the system.
And then us as process people are saying, well, you have this wonderful system, and maybe we're experts in it as well. And we say, well, just use the system. And they're saying, but it doesn't work this 5 or 10% of the time. So thus they have to do this other way.
Have to bring it out. Yeah.
I'm not saying there aren't solutions. I'm just saying this is kind of the landscape that I think everyone finds themselves in if they're trying to run a manufacturing business.
So you coming back to the original topic, I digressed a little bit on APS just because I see that as a problem in a lot of companies that are running their ERP, but they're not running APS. But back to I have to make a decision between ERPs. What do I do? Do I merge and put everyone in one ERP? What's my decision process?
Sure, that's good. So now we say we have two good ERP systems.
Okay.
Maybe there's two scenarios. One, maybe private equity's purchased a couple, and we're going to figure out what to do. The other is I'm matured as a firm, and I want to go acquire the guy a little smaller than me.
Okay.
So in the latter, I've seen very successfully acquire the latter and just send me the financials. You keep running your business, I'll keep running mine. Have some teams over there that I want in place that fit my culture, a little cleanup, and then it just starts running smoothly. I got my profits coming in. I got similar results to when I purchased it. Things are looking pretty good. Now when you start saying, well, I want to do some synergy around shared customers across promoting products, or you have customers that I don't have, so now we can integrate those. The question is, what do you bring over into the other across the ERP systems? Because you might have a sales team over there, or a sales team over here. So let's consolidate sales
Let's
teams.
consolidate sales. Let's
So
talk
that's
to
the
that.
very first thing that happens. That's always the first thing, because you can consolidate that sales team and they'll work both accounts if they're in the same line.
Okay.
If they're completely separate lines, you still have that sales team kind of all working for a senior VP of sales.
Let's assume you bring them all together. How does that affect ERP, and what do you...
you still have to put the order into each system separately, because each one needs to fulfill it separately. So that's the first thing. You still kind of are maintaining them separately.
Okay. Maybe they join CRMs first.
Yeah, and that's more of a lead connection, because in manufacturing, the quoting and the order process is so tightly coupled to the ERP. You can't really put that into a CRM where that's going to handle the orders, because you need to know if you have availability, what's your lead times, like all of that. You can't do in a CRM unless it's up to date by the minute of what's going on. So sales is going to quote out, I'll give it to you in 8 weeks, or whatever they can do. So they set that and they establish that, and that becomes the order in that ERP.
Okay.
And so you kind of still maintain separate brands of products in their respective ERP systems. So now the question that you still have is, how's my business doing? So the most simplest version is to just say, send me all your monthly reports, and the financial controller or CFO from the other firm will send those over, and you have what you need to understand, is it doing well? And then there'll be inner office communications about day-to-day things. But that's overall how the data works. The second is still maintaining separate ERP systems to create a data portal where you bring it all together and you can run unified analytics across that. And that's very common in healthcare. In healthcare, data's coming in from different pharmacy systems, different vision systems, different claim systems. And the question is, what were our claims for the month? So they all get brought in, unified, stacked together, and then you can query all of it and get those answers. So that type of approach can be done where if you acquire a firm and some more, you can bring that in and get a unified view into the data. Now, it's not working in those systems, but it's giving you the visibility into those systems so you can make some choices and move forward without disrupting any of the businesses.
Okay.
And that's the key question. Are you going to disrupt that business to put them on a common ERP?
Right.
And if it's a bad ERP and they're unhappy with it anyway, and it's a match, great. If there's a mismatch, well, the theory is just bring it over, keep everything the same. It should work just fine. We'll just keep a common set of standardized things. Aren't these similar businesses? We should be able to run them the same.
Right. That's what I hear CEOs say. Why can't we just put these two things together? They're very similar. In
principle, that is completely that's a great position, and in the detail is where it tends to fail.
What kinds of failure points are there for that approach? Let's pretend that one company is running a particular ERP pretty well. The other one either has not a great ERP system, or they're not doing a great job. How do we get the best practices?
So say one is highly dependent upon EDI or some custom other interface to run their business. Like they may have a custom scheduling module, for example. Like you don't have to use the built-in APS system. There's other systems that will schedule better than the out of the box. So you could dovetail that in. But maybe you have EDI orders coming in. Now, if your ERP you're moving to doesn't really do that well, you're not going to have to customize that whole thing to somehow make that work. And if they don't have that capability at all, then you're going to have to somehow integrate with some other party to now feed that data in. Might include doing some API integrations, which get pretty spendy, to not just to move the data in, but to test it for all the variations for all the scenarios. So hopefully there's a solution, but still that has to be configured. So now that's added one more thing.
You're speaking to a risk factor here. So a risk factor that has to be evaluated. What I'm hearing is, what integrations are there with a system before you try to move it to something
Yeah,
else.
and so it's I'd say it's better to have an independent do all that functionality scoping, because if you have the VAR, someone who say we want to move to SAP or
Okay.
just Infor or Dynamics, any NetSuite. I don't want to. There's more, but if you have a vendor who's really married to that product, do an analysis. They're going to be looking. Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we can do that too. But it's better to have an independent who doesn't care what the outcome is, but to make sure it all gets captured, like all the functional capabilities of what it needs to do. Now, that EDI might have a specific field. We don't care about that at this level. We just need to know that there's a something there that needs to be solved. So then that can be dealt with in a scoping process. And I think you've done that quite a
Yeah.
bit, where
So what?
you know some very well, but you also know the business, and you're trying to understand what the business is about
Right.
before evaluating what's a good fit.
So the auditing of the business and really understanding if the business is going to be a good fit for the other ERP would certainly be step one. Can we move to this ERP that company A is running very well, company B I've just acquired needs something. Now is company B's going to be able to use company A's ERP? There needs to be a deep dive into that.
Yeah, and before that though is every integrator of the new system, they always complain that the business, the users, do not spend enough time validating the new system. So what's happening is the existing business is being disrupted by the need to switch systems, both in terms of understanding processes. So they come in and say, show us your processes. So there takes time for that. You're basically paying another firm to learn your business so that they can model it and understand it and properly move both the data and ensure the process where the processes fit. And then along the way, there's testing phases where here's some trial data, go in and do your sales. So they're having to learn a new system. While they're running already, they're probably stressed because one, they got acquired. Two, they're being told new things they have to do. There's some new leadership giving them new directives that they're trying to change some processes that have been asked of them because we're trying to unify the way we do things.
Right.
And they're trying to test the new data in the system they don't understand to see if it works. So their whole
a lot of
life is
change
being disrupted for
all
a
at one
year.
time.
Yeah. So the question is that worth it? And are you going to get what you need from doing that? And it might be really important because there is a value having everybody running under the same system. But I think we overstate how important that is sometimes.
Yeah. So getting everyone on. So
because I've seen one run for 8 years with completely separate systems, just sharing financials,
And it worked.
And it's highly profitable, and that's why they were so well, so desirable, because they're highly profitable, and they never cared about integrating data.
Is that right?
They never cared about consolidating ERPs.
So, I do wonder, especially the way technology and AI and everything's moving so quickly right now, if it becomes less and less important that you're all on the same ERP system. Is it really necessary? Maybe you just...
Well, I look at scale. So I spent some time with Michael Gerber, who said, work on your business, not in your business. His question was, to me, when we're having time together, was put it at scale of 1,000. How would you scale it? How would you, in this case, maybe, how would you acquire 100 firms? Can you move 100 firms onto your ERP?
Wow, that sounds like a big, heavy lift.
Well, yeah, but if you were in that, if you had the will to do that and the resources to do that, and they were a good fit, how would you do that? And you think about it very differently than, well, I just need to convert 1 or 2 over, so we'll get through this.
Yeah, because it would be nice if you could cookie cutter it but I guess the truth is every manufacturer really runs so differently. What I've seen, just for their organizational structures, the way that everyone has their own unique sauce, it looks like, for how they run something. And then you're trying to get them all to conform with one way of doing business.
Well, I think what you could be getting at is you could convert things quicker now than before, where a developer or team needs to have deep understanding of the target system and somehow bridge the gap into the old system where it's often an expert in that old system provides data and you hook that up. But with generative AI, it's quite good at doing a lot of that mapping, and it might
Okay.
be more of a review process to go, oh yeah, those fields out of that 100 fields, here's 98. What are those two?
Yeah.
And it can do a deep dive into what's in those fields to see how we convert this set of attributes to this set of attributes, like this set of brands over to this set of brands, or these account codes to these account codes.
Yeah.
And especially account codes, that's a tough one. The financial team really going to have their hands in that, but there's a lot that can be done with that should speed up migrations.
So migrations, do you think they're getting easier?
I think they're still just as hard. I think not everyone's using the tools as well as they can. They still take 2,000 hours or 5,000 hours or whatever.
I'm having a
it
hard
is.
time seeing why it should take so long. It feels like it should be easier today than it was, say, 2 years ago. But maybe our learning curve just isn't quite there yet. The technology is capable, but people haven't fully grasped how to utilize things yet, maybe.
You still have 50 key objects that need to be migrated, like customers, addresses, items, bombs, materials, routings, operations, whatever they're called. All that has to come across, and though the structures are kind of similar, an item's still an item and it still has a bomb.
Yeah.
You still have to make sure you get it right.
And that kind of requires some human eyeballs still.
Yeah, and if there's a different system that already has existing data and you have to map into it, there's still some thinking to do. So it's still a risk to convert, but there's a lot of benefits. So it's just being upfront about them. I hear people kind of gloss over and just kind of push things forward. That's why there's a couple different dysfunctions I come across.
Yeah. So when you acquire a new company, the option is, I hear, is like, one, just let them both continue to run the way they've always run. And if they were both profitable, then that's beautiful. And that's the most hands-off piece. I think it sounds like the second level of
Depends on the goal. It depends on the goal.
Of their data, putting all their data in one place and getting some joint analytics.
That's an easy, quick win.
Is an easy, quick win.
It's weeks.
It takes weeks, literally weeks to do that, compared to the 6 months of pain and aggravation.
No disruption to anybody, but a hassle to IT for a short while.
You just work with IT on bringing that all in.
And then
that does seem like the easiest.
Once you're there, you have analytic. You have a team who understand the data, and it's more of like a business intelligence team or whatever we want to call it these days. But at that point, it's more like taking the data we have and providing what's needed for that visibility.
Okay, and you have experience doing that kind of work, don't you?
Oh yeah, you can. It's typically something like on Microsoft, it's like a Power BI thing. It used to be other tools, but Power BI is a solid framework along with the new Microsoft Fabric. There's also, you can keep things in like Google Cloud or AWS and use the tools built into that environment. That's fine too. There's it's all just a matter of choice for the technical teams and those technical decisions, often guided by a CTO or someone like that with hopefully a data background.
Yeah.
My problem is that sometimes that decision comes from generalists who understand IT extremely well and not as much depth in the data and what are the best practices around that.
So let's say I want to consolidate, say, a purchasing role, so that because company A and company B both buy steel, and now if I buy steel in bulk, I'm going to get better prices on that, and I need to know what my history was between both of them, and I need to see my demand in both systems, put them together so I can place a PO and have some of that steel shipped here, some of it's shipped there. What kind of tool am I going to need? And is that something you could do outside of the ERP, or do I really have to be in the same ERP to do that?
No, you don't need to be in the same ERP, but it's just a matter of whether or not you're going to go into each and look at them and then cut and paste the data, which tends to happen anyway, or whether or not you're going to export that through, like, preferably an automated process that exports it and gives them visibility.
So you could get the visibility from both systems, put them in a combined
Really
place.
simple. That's if it's an on-prem like a system where you own your own SQL server sitting
Yeah.
in the back office, or in a cloud that you control. That's one style of getting access. The other is when you have a hosted type approach. Those are harder. There's tools, so there's ways to get that data out, but sometimes it's a little harder, especially if you want to query it hard and heavy and match it up to others. So you might want to bring out that data into a data lake and be able to query those two things together and show them in the simplest ways, like a Power BI or Microsoft Fabric environment. But people use Tableau. In the old days, we used Crystal Reports.
Yeah.
Kind of. There's all sorts of ways to do that. Even Excel is fine. There's Excel connectors that can go straight into a database. But there's still other ways that allow you to. A lot of the more modern ones have connectors as well, so you can basically reach into both and bring that back and unify them. So it's not like a hard problem. It's just something that people have to realize they can do, that they don't
It
have
doesn't-
to
it-
go through these more robust solutions, that some of which I've kind of touched on. You can have connectors that just go in and grab it and
Just
pull
go
it
in
back.
and grab it. So then I'm just thinking through the process then. So I'm in purchasing. I'm now in charge of 2 companies instead of 1 company. I've always just taken care of my first one, but now they brought in somebody else. So I would go into this.
I would talk to IT first
Okay.
and say, IT, do you have who's in charge of both systems? Hopefully that gets brought together under one person. But initially, there's an IT person over in one company and an IT person at the other.
But hopefully
And-
that gets
but
merged.
But initially, you just go to each and you say, how do we get access to the data in the system?
Okay.
And hopefully they know how. And then you just say, sometimes you can ask, how I want to do this task. I want to bring both of these together. Do you know how? And they'll probably already know how, or they'll probably go to some AI system and find out how, and then they'll tell you how.
My best buddy, AI.
Yeah. So you'll get probably, like, you could get a Power BI set up and get your connectors going, and you could make it yourself, or you say, hey, can we allocate some number of hours for some expert to come in and help us for a week, and then you get it, and then you're off to running. But that's the immature way to do it.
Okay.
That would be like level 3. Level 1 is I have no access. I can't get my data.
Okay.
Second is ad hoc, like let's just get in that system and query some stuff. Third is where you start to standardize platforms, where the IT team has probably set up, here's a way that you can get access into all 3 systems, and they've provided some tools, and they've probably developed some initial reports that kind of standardize what things.
Okay.
So that's like you finally arrived, and you're kind of doing analytics a little bit.
Okay.
But you're past kind of this initial querying and solving ad hoc problems. So that's like the base level. Now the next level is when
Level 4.
yeah, where the users are truly empowered to go in and solve problems themselves. Now, it doesn't always work that way, because often to get to that level requires massive amount of work by a development team to eliminate all the complexity.
And now,
So
we
that
and
maybe
we
just we
still
don't do that.
haven't talked about so far in this. I love the way you're breaking down the levels. First of all, that's easy for me to kind of wrap my head around it. But we haven't even gotten yet to having to have 2 ERPs and disrupt the whole business. You're still talking about ways that I can combine a role without a fundamental disruption to my business.
Because these are solutions that might work well enough to say we don't need to do all that. I'm still pointing out, like, make the case that you need to unify ERP systems.
This is before you don't even go to unifying ERP systems if any of these other things will solve the problem, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. What's the use case for why you're trying to unify them?
So unifying, when I think about unifying,
I'm happy to do it, and you are too, because you get paid well to do that. But I'd still push back and say, why are we doing this?
Why are we doing this?
What does it provide?
The value. And so you have to look specifically at what. So when I'm thinking value, I definitely thought sales. Like I said, my steel, combining buying, combining IT.
The case is, so purchasing is doing that. Sales is now doing that. The planner's now doing that. Everybody's now doing all these little duct tape things. At some point you say, this is just a lot of people doing all this repeated ad hoc kind of things. Maybe we should just get them all working together. See, that's a valid use case. Is it's just too much to keep everybody doing a little, I call it hodgepodge of things. So at some point you say, yeah, let's just go. When you think it all through all the way, you go, let's just convert it.
It sounds like there has to be a real mapping of alignment between the two organizations. Really, where is there crossover and true alignment between the different organizations? And then that alignment almost has to be overlaid with where would this be better in with using the same data in the ERP? Is that really necessary? But if it's not necessary to go there, if there's something if there's something easier, as you pointed out, don't go there unless you have to, unless there's a reason.
Well, it's always better to have a business that works all in one platform. You save costs,
Okay.
right? I'll make the case
Yeah,
for it.
make the case the
Well,
other way.
I mean-
So first of all, you've kind of convinced me that maybe
Yeah,
I don't
I know.
need, maybe I don't need to go find
Yeah.
to disrupt that whole business. Maybe I just need to, if they can run reasonably well on their ERP, just
Well,
let them keep doing their different
I'll
ERP.
tell you right out of the gate, the financial team's already considered costs, and the executives running probably saying, I don't want these hassles. So they've already decided they don't want that mess. They're willing to take a hit for a year and have a mess in order to not have a long-term mess, I think.
I see. So maybe if it's something that is going to give them the value, they have to look at their strategy,
Yep.
basically, and in the timeline, because putting a new ERP system in is going to take time. Integrating that is going to take time.
And if it's a mid-level manufacturer, you just can assume it's $500,000 or plus or minus hundreds of thousands. It could be $1 million, it could be a couple 100,000, but I've seen some for 300, but I've seen many for much more. And they start out a certain way, and the quote is for X, and they kind of come in under that. But what they don't tell you is for the next 6 months, you have their consulting services on semi full time, fixing everything for 6 months, guaranteed, fixing things that didn't get looked at because they knew, well, they were somehow missed or known that we'll deal with that later. And so there's a game in there on how that gets handled, but there's always something on the other side. And it tends to not be part of the scope because it wasn't. And so you could either get all that included up front, which is going to extend your timeline to get going, or you do what I think a good integrator will do is go, this will get them live. We'll actually find out some of the problems. It might hurt a little while, and we'll fix the rest because we don't know what shows up until you're doing it. So they could overanalyze, which would take longer and cost more on the front end to try to get it perfect, or they do well enough to get it down the line, and then you're in production, and now you're dealing with the cleanup. So the pricing's always going to be
But the gap in
different.
cost between going to a new ERP and fully implementing a new ERP at a company that already had something that was relatively working, that's a really high cost factor compared to the earlier things you were describing.
Yeah, those are simple, and you still need people who understand how to query and build things for users at either approach. You still should have that. So it doesn't change that you need some of this, that manufacturers who are the weakest at this still need some people who know how to do some analytic type things. Like,
I don't see many manufacturers that have
and they
that
should have
kind
someone
of
in, and they
resource.
really need someone in-house. They really need an employee, because that employee is going to be able to learn the ERP, they can find a hybrid employee that's going to serve more of it. And if you're going to go acquire more firms, get an employee who's going to learn how to do the migration so they can do half the migration on the next one. That's the biggest missing, because that employee is going to be cost a quarter
of outside
the same outside
consulting.
person, and they'll actually know the business by the end of that first one. So have them in there. They're offloading, learning, and they're now the expert, ultimately telling the integrator on the next one what to do. And at some point, you can have your own integration team. If you're going to do 50 ERPs, the first thing I do is hire my own integration team, and the VAR would just be for the really hard stuff. Like the hard stuff that you don't want to miss. So you can probably offload
Yeah.
99. Yeah, I know of a person. I know someone who's done 5 ERP migrations. He's a
Okay.
senior developer. He has no clue how to upgrade the servers. He doesn't upgrade the servers. He doesn't know how to do the installs. But in terms of the migration of the data and developing custom reports and things in the system for that, for upgrading the system itself, he's an expert at. But he doesn't know how to do the VAR stuff. Anytime I talk to him, he's like, "Oh, that's what the VAR used to do."
Okay.
Don't know how to do that. So that's a good place to be, I think, is to hire a team of 3 or 4, and you just have them on staff to do all these ERP implementations. That's a possible solution.
You touched on, I haven't seen it from an integration, but from just the administration of an ERP system,
Yeah,
I
that
think
too.
manufacturers constantly underestimate the fact that this resource, this person that you need a person who's an expert in your own system, whatever that ERP system is. There should be at least one point person and probably a backup person to that person
Yeah, yeah.
who's in that role. And
Well, there's an administrator of keeping users running, security, and that can fit kind of in IT. What I think you need is a developer type person who can actually do a lot of that work that you hand out to the VAR to do. And also, I think you need an analytics type person who now can query the things that the system doesn't really provide. There's always things that the system doesn't provide, and if there's a choice to either put those types of analytics and access in the system itself, and there's a case for that, but it's often kind of clunky and difficult, or using modern tools for analytics, which you want a new field, drag, drop, publish, 5 minutes versus a 6 hour turnaround for your consultant to do.
just the speed of,
The speed and the time it takes and the ease for certain types of changes. So you want someone who knows how to query and build and publish those things, and someone else who can do like the site migrations.
what would you call those
Well,
jobs?
sometimes they're the same person. They're the same person because I used to be that type of person. So I
Okay.
know they exist. But if you want scale, then you divorce it from each other, and you have a couple different roles to build out a little internal team.
An internal team to help with this. I guess it can't be understated. The cost of consultants versus the cost of an internal team.
It's a quarter. It's the quarter.
It's huge.
It's a quarter.
A quarter of the cost.
Quarter of the cost. I mean, you know the rate. You've all seen the rates.
Yeah,
And
it's
I
true.
can tell you a good developer, about quarter of the rates.
And I think that a lot of especially on the smaller mid-sized manufacturers who might be just acquiring their first company, they're just starting to grow. They may still be thinking in terms of, oh, once I hire an employee, this is going to be such a, expensive long-term cost. I don't want employees. I'll just hire consultants for this kind
How
of
long
thing.
are you going to have your ERP for?
That's a good question.
Well, more than the 3 years he's going to hang around before he goes somewhere else. So you want to have that handled with documentation and standards and things like that IT builds in, and that person helps collaborate around. So you could bring more in and scale and whatnot.
Yeah, because what I see is that the ERP administration is sort of an afterthought, or to some companies, or
Yeah.
it's a shared role. I do shipping and I do ERP. What I do?
Well, security and users, like how often do you get a new user? That's not too hard.
Right.
Oh, that person needs some new access to a module they don't have access to. Not as the same. Oh, how do you I am struggling in this area of the system. How do you do it better? That's kind of maybe a training person. It could be the same person. But what I've been referring to is how you get the system actually working, like the data right, the functionality built.
You mean it's not just like plug and play, that things are going to happen and
No, yeah, of course not, because even pricing changes where they have complex scenarios. A lot of that has to be manually done, where either you go through each record and manually do it, or you need to build a process to insert 5,000 records based on
that's a great example.
some complex scenario of how you want to price.
That's a really great example. Pricing scenarios. How do we get
So
consistency?
you go to your VAR, and 20 hours later or 10 hours later, they do it, and then you have to wonder, was that price update? How many things do I have to sell to get my
To get the money back of what
And
you
I've been
spent
on
on the
both sides.
VAR.
I've been on that side. So it took me 20 hours once, and well, I was like, I thought it would take 10, and it was harder because you got to get it right. You don't want to insert the wrong records. So yeah, that's where it's, if you have someone internally who knows how to do it, anytime you want it, you just go. They tell you you'll have it next week, and you just do it.
What kind of credentials, if I were an employer looking for this person to help me, what kind of credentials would I be looking for? Or what kind of role would I call that?
Oh, it's a developer. It's a for that. And if you wanted someone who's really strong in your ERP, you just
Yeah.
look for the name of your ERP, the word developer or analyst,
Oh, okay.
most likely. And what I've seen often is you don't have time to look. You could if you build the right job posting, you might publish it yourself. But that's where you just go get a local contracting firm HR firm to go find them for you, talent agency.
I mean, that's got to be tough
You pay an extra
sometimes.
30% or whatever these days to get that, but you got somebody who you can let go anytime you want. But they also sometimes turn into 3-year gigs, or after 6 months you can hire them. So there's a lot of ways to get the throughput you need. I did most of my work back in the 2000s under those type of contracting terms, where I worked years at places under contracts, and so did the rest of the staff. And of course, it depends on the country you're in. There's different rules for different states, but that's a great way to get what you need. And I've seen in all the manufacturing spaces, there's agencies that specialize in just that tool. There's like for each one of them,
Okay.
they have pools of people contractors they've worked with that they'll recommend in. So you're going to a specialist contracting firm, not a consulting firm that's going to do the work for you. Here's your guy. Here's your resource. Here's your contractor. X dollars per hour for the next 3 or 6 or 12 months.
Okay.
Which is about a fair way to do it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think finding those resources, first of all, it's knowing that you need the resource, which is
The
why,
other is
why we're talking about
the other
this.
is to snake someone from another company who already knows how to do it. So you could go look for talent.
Yeah.
And they show in their job description that they do those things, and you can try to bring them over.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that, but it certainly seems that there's there definitely are a lot of different approaches you can take, and when you're bringing together companies with these different ecosystems, I know that recently we just did an audit of a company that is in not exactly the same situation, but fairly similar, and we evaluated their people, their processes, over the course of 2 days. And we learned a lot of things about where there were opportunities for improvement.
Most of them weren't the ERP.
Isn't that interesting? They weren't the ERP, even though we were brought in.
At first, it sounded like the ERP.
Thinking like it was the ERP.
It sounded when they talked about it, but when you looked at it, it was actually dynamics inside the team.
Yeah.
And those dynamics are really important. They start typically at the top. Like almost every time I've seen, they start with who's running it. And it could be someone who's been there for a long time or someone who's brand new. And oftentimes someone brand new is really wanting to make some changes, and they're dealing with some management that's been there for a very long time. And so they're trying to work through that. Founders who've been there for a long time have hired these new whippersnappers and trying to show them that, that just doesn't work. And then I've typically seen that there's a lot of really competent people, but for somehow they're struggling to get certain things done, even though they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's the system, but normally it's something else that like stress, like overwhelm, the cognitive load goes down, and they just kind of do what they know, like how to survive this. And so what is really great people kind of gets eroded for different reasons, for cultural reasons or often just changes happening, a lot of change, especially in the acquisition. People are overwhelmed because leadership's trying to consolidate things and put standards in, and people are now have to do 3 jobs instead of 1.
So what was presented to us as an ERP problem really was more related to process and people potentially overlaid over top of the ERP. And I'm just thinking about how expensive, of course, an ERP system is. These are big investments for
Well, before you
companies.
go there, I think the other problem is sometimes you have a bad apple and it's causing a lot of problems for a
Yeah.
lot of people, and I've seen it too many times. Um, you're kind of stuck. They're in a critical role, and you want to get rid of them, but you can't, and they're hurting people, but you can't. They're either hoarding or they're bulldogging. They're like
Hoarding.
the
I've
one
heard
is
that
so
one.
I've seen like one is someone's incompetent and they just shouldn't be in the role, but they're in a spot where they just don't belong there. And so how do you move them in or out? And it's impacting people. The second is you have indifference, or just like they're retiring in a year. It's just kind of checked out and left the building already.
Yeah.
So that's a separate problem. The other is negligence, where people are taking actions that are wrong. And then the worst sometimes is just arrogance, where they know what to do, and then they're leaving bloodbath everywhere.
I
And
love
so, how do
that.
you get rid of it? Now, if you have just one of those problems, you can survive it. It's probably a week, a day or a week of hassles. If someone makes a mistake, it costs you 50 grand or 100 grand, and it's not the end of the world. If you've done two of them, it's like, well, it costs you a month. Like you got an OSHA violation because someone was being negligent and the other person was being indifferent to who oversees it, or someone's being arrogant, like we'll just get away with it. Like various things so two is bad. Three means you're probably going to lose a year. And four at the same time, you shut the
Wow.
doors.
Yeah.
So
Toxic.
so you see these things, and it's not like I categorize people, and it's not the only way to see it, but I go, oh yeah, there's some arrogance over there, or that person's kind of checked out, or it's the way just to kind of gauge things and to understand what's going on,
Yeah.
to see where the impact is. Because when you keep hearing the same people pointing at the same person in a certain way, you go, what's going on? Why can't they deal with what's going on? The leadership has their hands tied on that, and often you can't because there's all sorts of reasons that you're stuck with it.
The hoarding reason. I've had manufacturers approach me before saying that they have employees that do a very critical role, and they won't let anyone see how they do that role. They won't train anyone to do it, and they won't offload anything. How do you handle that?
That one's a tough one, but that's where the data can get you around it.
Really?
Yeah. I've done that where this person was hoarding, couldn't get access to the system. I got the data, built new reports. They could see everything, could see the truth. On-time shipping was bad. A bunch of other things were bad. At some point, it's like, well, things got out of control. They were starting to escalate in a way that HR could actually document some problems, and it turns into here's your
Yeah.
severance package.
It does, but there's this real fear factor. I can't give somebody a severance package because payroll's not going to run tomorrow, or my shipments won't
But
go
I've
out
seen it where
tomorrow.
somebody's disrupted a business so much, you're gonna have to live with the data hassles they've introduced forever because of the things they've done, like whether it's be intentional, like, or just negligence. They've caused so much disruption that
They're control
it's
freaks.
better just
They
to
don't think they're negligent. They just don't want to let anybody have anything.
Well, there's that problem. That's a slightly different problem where you have people who just think they know what they're doing, or anyhow, there's all sorts of variations, but
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is tough when you have to look to get rid of somebody. But I'd say cut bait sooner if they're just not going to work, and figure out, rather, I don't want to send them home and pay them and get the right person in, because they're going to hurt people more. Like those
Yeah.
are the truths. Like
I like your perspective too, that some of the ways you can help protect yourself from that happening or handle that situation is that there's data, you said.
well, that's how
And you
data
can
doesn't lie. It doesn't lie.
and you can get to data regardless of how much someone may be trying to hoard information. There is data in a system. When you can access that data, it tells a story.
Yeah, and if it's all in Excel, then at some point it does have to make it into the ERP. But that Excel is still, IT can get access to it if you really need to see what they're doing. So there are ways to solve that problem. But if you can get that data once and see what they're doing, then you can clone it and then mirror it and then systematize it and then deal with the situation.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's why I say I come at it from a data standpoint. Other people come at it from other approaches. They're all valid, but that's from how I grew up.
Yeah,
That's how
I like it.
yeah.
I hadn't even thought about it. I think my mind first went to, oh, I've got to maybe secretly photograph them or get screenshots or figure out
Well, that's valid too.
what they're doing because there's no documentation on their role. So how will I do that
Well, I'd
role?
start putting vault on people who you're really concerned about. So it's recording what they're getting and deleting.
Oh,
So
okay.
you talk to IT and they'll put those
IT
things.
can help you out.
IT will put a capture on everything that's happening. So if they delete files maliciously or those types of things, you still have them, and you can at some point check how they're spending their time or what they're sending around. But if they're doing all that, they know they could be. So I don't know. This was
I know it's a little
this was not.
diversion on
Yeah, it's way
ERP.
off the ground from.
But these are the
from,
individuals that are interacting with the ERP system.
Yeah, it's
And and part of the concerns that manufacturers run into for sure. But definitely, I'll just kind of circling to the beginning of this conversation where we were talking about I bought a company, acquired a company. What do I do? I really appreciate your perspective today. I like the fact that you have said that you don't have to necessarily disrupt the whole organization to go to a new ERP, but you can do an evaluation of the companies that are in your portfolio, let's say, of their effectiveness of their system. Like a 2-day audit, like what we did, it would be very effective
It's
of
what I'd
understanding
say
it
it's
first. We need to
yeah.
understand.
Challenge the assumptions that say we must do this or we must do that. If we must convert, I would challenge the assumption. If we say we must stay the same, I would challenge that. In both cases, I think that there was that they missed out on opportunities to migrate when they just stayed the same, or at least build a data layer, or just, we're going to convert. We just must. And I know this. I've done this before, and I've done it 1,000
It's
times.
not a
and we must
must.
do this here because of this, that, and the other. I would at least challenge that assumption and to make sure that's been thought through rather than just pushed through. And those who might have a perspective otherwise haven't been heard. So I think that's always key.
I like that. Bring it in the team. Make sure you have the perspectives.
And an outside person can guide, because guess what? If the leader runs the meeting,
No one will ever.
no one will really spill their guts.
Yeah, I hear you.
And that's why you bring in outside, sometimes to verify what you want, but sometimes to show you something else that you go, yeah, okay, I'm listening. You've seen both. Sometimes
To
you're
show
there.
you.
Sometimes you're there just to prove a point. Sometimes you're there to show something new, and hopefully that's the perspective you come in with, or at least that's what unfolds as you start showing things. They're like, okay, I'll soften up on my heart.
Don't come in prejudging the situation. I think is what I'm
Well,
hearing.
for us, yeah, but even those who choose to bring us in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't prejudge that situation. And then in these audits, like we've been doing, we find out so much on the ground that really get a good idea of what you're dealing with before you make a recommendation. I think sometimes people make recommendations without really understanding an organization and the complexities of an organization.
I think just the value of being heard's worth it just in and of itself. Yeah, you're just heard and understood, and
everyone wants to feel heard,
that's really
right?
valuable too. Yeah.
You're right. Being heard and understood.
It creates some vitality, and everybody gets excited that something might change. Now, obviously, you have to deliver that and keep it moving, but that's kind of the first phase.
Yeah, and that everyone who's going to be touching whatever new or change is coming, that you care about them. You're not just shoving change down their throats. They have been able to show and demonstrate what they do, and that's been documented, and their management cares about it. That was definitely important to the team we spent some time with. The fact that they knew that their management team cared enough about them to send someone to really understand their business before pushing change on them.
Yeah.
That is a really great management, a good management move on their perspective. And then, of course, someone from the outside, I like to call it alien eyes. I feel like I have alien eyes sometimes. I'm able to come in like an alien and see an organization and see things that they just can't see because they've been doing things the same way for so long. They don't know what they don't know.
Yep.
And that's where the outside perspective, like the alien, comes in, right?
Well, and it's bringing it perspectives from other organizations, like other approaches. A lot of times you've seen it just that one way, so
That's all they've
that's helpful
seen.
too. Yeah.
When you've been in the same company for 47 years, you've literally not seen how the rest of the world does business. And so there are helpful things on the outside, which could maybe help. So, yeah, very interesting. Well, I really appreciate this conversation. I think this is going to be valuable to a lot of people who are in the space of saying, hey, I want to grow. I want to grow, and the way I can grow is I can buy another business that's similar
Yeah.
to mine. And now, once I grow, what am I going to do next, and how am I going to handle that? And I hope that today's conversation will be helpful to all of you who watch this. That this will guide you a little bit in that thinking about what am I going to do about my data? What am I going to do about my ERP? So we'll leave it at that.